I want you to welcome back to the program nationally recognized expert on foreign policy on energy, a contributor over at the Daily Caller, Newsmax, The Hill. Dan Perkins is back with us. Dan, how are you, sir?
Good morning, and thank you for having me on, Paul.
Yes, sir. It's always great to talk to you. So, let's talk first about this story last week, and then I'd love to get your thoughts on what happened over the weekend. There's just an explosive news weekend. But tell us a little bit about what happened with this Mitch McConnell situation on Twitter.
Well, they're really it's absolutely bizarre. I wrote a piece should be out sometime this week where I took the headline from the various accounts where this group of protesters were in front of Mitch McConnell's house in Kentucky and said it's recorded, stick a knife in his chest and kill him. Now, I wrote this piece because there's a law on the books, a federal law, Code Section 18, subsection 155, I believe, and it says that if you threaten the president, a member of his family, or any elected official, it's a felony, subject to fine and imprisonment. In the Obama administration, there were many examples, but two specific examples I cite is where one particular gentleman threatened, didn't actually do anything to hang the president in his house, and he got 2 years. And another person threatened the president and Maxine Waters, and he got 4 years in jail for just the act of the threat. So I said this article is basically written to Attorney General Barr. Why is it that when President Trump was threatened, for example, by Peter Fonda, his son Barron was threatened to be taken away from his mother and thrown into a cage with the two pedophiles, or that the Secretary of Homeland Security should be stripped naked and beaten? He was never prosecuted.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that Democrats go after people and who make these outlandish threats, but when people make threats against Republicans, our government doesn't seem to want to go after them? And it seems to me that we should expect that our government should give everybody the same protections. And yet it seems like Republicans, well, he didn't really mean it, or I don't really want to press charges, or.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Democrats don't bother with that. So what happened was his campaign committee put that story, and by the way, it's not difficult to, as I said to the Attorney General, this is not going to be a tough job for the FBI to identify who the person is, because she's there on tape in front of a camera and says who she is.
Yes.
When she's making the statement. So it's not hard to figure out who the person was who was making the threat. And so he put the story on his Twitter account, and Twitter suspended his account, his campaign account, because they felt that it was biased and it was racist what he put up there, which is basically what he did, is put the story as it was reported by the people who were there, who were communicating with the press. So I guess there was a huge outcry by a lot of people against Twitter, and they finally reinstated his account. But what's the second part of the story is, not only does the government need to start, if we don't stop this, Paul, if we don't stop this rhetoric, which is getting more and more violent, somebody's going to die, or somebodies are going to die. And there doesn't seem to be any concern when it's Democrats attacking Republicans. And I think there's a double standard here, and I think it's wrong. We should be enforcing the law. If people knew what's going on, they would agree with me that there are consequences when you threaten the life of an elected official.
And there's no question. There's no
you go to jail.
There's no
but
question.
If we
Yeah, and no, Dan, I mean, you're right. And then there's also the social media angle to all of this that's only going to get worse. You know, Twitter, once again, I mean, you know, they don't care that it's the majority leader of the Senate. You know, they're going to censor him because they just don't like the fact that leftists are exposed as advocating for violence. I mean, that's clearly what that is. And so that's going to get even worse in the next year leading up to 2020.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, I think I tend to agree with you, but I would put one caveat on the table. There are things going on in our country that the left and the social media doesn't seem to understand what's going on. Let me give you an example. Universal Pictures wanted to bring out this movie called Hunt, which is a story about teenagers hunting other teenagers. And they decided to postpone it, and then after the shootings in El Paso and Dayton, they decided they were going to postpone it, and then over the weekend they decided they were going to kill it because the protests of the American people were so strong they didn't want to take the heat. And so what I think is happening, Paul, is that there are more and more of us who are standing up, and I quote the old line from the movie Network, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. And I think that's what's happening in this country, slowly but surely. And social media is beginning to understand, you know, Facebook, not that it was a huge number, but Facebook just recently got fined $5 billion from the federal government for its biased activity. So I think that the American people are basically kind of fed up with what the hell's going on, and they're beginning to talk. And I heard last week a great story. Woman who was really angry about being called a white supremacist. You know, if you're white, you're probably a racist or a white supremacist or both. And she said, I'll admit to you that I was intimidated. I didn't wear my MAGA hat or T-shirt, but by God, I'm going to start wearing it every day. Nobody better best me.
Yeah. There are people I think that are feeling a little bit more emboldened because they realize that their opinions are not the minority. Matter of fact, they're probably the majority when it comes to, you know, what's going on. And speaking of that, I'd like to get your comments. What happened with Jeffrey Epstein, real quick? You know, the media says he committed suicide. No one believes that's the real story. And I think this is an interesting moment in American history where people on the left and the right and in the middle are not believing en masse. I mean, yesterday was interesting to watch the media yesterday because you could kind of almost sense their frustration that so many people were not listening to them. They didn't believe. And so what do? They come out and they try to attack conspiracy theorists. But, I mean, you know, we know it was in those documents the day before, and then he winds up, you know, quote, well, he winds up dead, or some people even think he's not dead. But anyway, what was your reaction to all that?
Well, I think it was interesting that the headline yesterday on Drudge, which is reflecting what you're talking about, is this another person on the Clinton family hit list? Was he did he commit suicide because of the damaging things that would happen had there been a trial? And there have been numerous examples of people related to the Clintons in their campaign at various times that wound up dead on a park bench in Washington, D.C. or mysteriously got sick and died.
And you mysteriously get sick and die, and then you're like, right as you die, you like sprinkle some carpet fibers on your body.
Well, you know, but the point that you're making is I think a very valid point, and I equate it to people are beginning to understand how dangerous this attempted coup Donald Trump really was. I mean, the 302s that came out from Orr last week were just devastating. And there's going to be more and more stuff. And what's important is going on here is that if you paid attention to what happened when the 302s were released last Thursday, we now have France, Italy, and the UK so far involved in this conspiracy against the president. That's serious, serious stuff. And so this is movie stuff, or maybe I should write another book. But I think the American people are beginning to understand. And I wrote a piece. I wrote a satire piece the week before, and the title of it, "Colonel Mustard in the Library." If you're familiar with the game of
Clue.
Okay.
Yes.
Clue. So was it Colonel Mustard in the library, or was it Hussein Obama in the White House? It's a parody, and I had a lot of fun writing it, but there's a lot of truth in it. And I have been writing several times now, beginning to raise the question: if you have Brennan, if you had Comey and Strzok and Page and Orr and McCabe and on and on and on, all these people involved in this process, to assume that the President of the United States had no knowledge to me is a huge mistake. So I think that, and I wrote a piece probably about 2 months ago about this, that what we're going to do, and I know this is going to sound bizarre, but what we're going to do here is we're going to have a situation that sometime between now and the general election in 2020, more and more people are going to be asking the question, what did Obama know, and when did he know it, and what did he do about it?
Yeah.
Now, and so I suspect that Barr may come up with enough evidence to indict former President Obama. The Democrats have done a wonderful job setting it up.
Yeah, that would be.
And here's the twist:
the news of the century.
And here's the twist: Donald Trump pardons Barack Obama.
Oh, wow. Well, hey, you said it here. I'll remember that, Dan. I appreciate
All right, sir.
I appreciate you coming on. It's always great to talk to you, sir. Have a great week ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me.
Dan Perkins.
To be with you.
Yes, sir. That would be incredible. That would be absolutely incredible if that were to take place.